Good morning, Tracy. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
Good. I'm doing okay. Thanks for asking. We were just chatting about how I'm fighting a bug. But it is what it is. We're here and I'm excited to talk to you. I feel like it's been on my calendar for a while now. So I'm like, yay, it's finally here. We get to have this
Me
conversation.
too.
Yeah, yeah. So I would love for you to start just by introducing yourself to the listeners.
I would love to. Thank
Okay.
you. My name is Tracey Yokas. I am a mom, wife, author, writer, artist, a little bit like most people, lots of hashtags, and I am really a mental health advocate. That's what I'm most passionate about right now.
That's awesome. Cool. And I'm excited to talk about many of your hats today. Actually, the first one that I want to chat about is your creativity, because I love your website that when I go to that, like that's what I see is creativity. And so we will talk about your book and your writing and all of that, but I just would love, I also loved that you said, that you can be found playing with glitter paint and glue. And so can you talk more about that, like the creativity side and how that has kind of transformed for you?
I would love to, because I'm going to play with paint, glitter, and glue later today when we're done with this
Yay.
conversation. Well, as part of my healing journey, which, as you said, well, I'm sure we'll get into again later, but
Hmm.
one of the things I had to come to terms with was that I did not know how to take care of myself. My
Hmm.
therapist had been asking me for a very long time, like, what can you do? What can you do to take care of yourself? And I was very resistant to that idea because I didn't feel that that was something I should do while
Hmm.
my daughter was struggling. But at some point, I finally got the message, oh, like she's right. The only person I can actually control is myself. And I did
Yeah.
need to do some self-care. And I had to get quiet, which I was very bad at that point as well,
Yeah.
and try to tap into my intuition. And it was asking me to get creative again. So I started very, very simply with, some highlighters and some paper and some stickers that I found in the bottom of my daughter's toy chest
Hmm.
and started just playing with color and texture and things again. And it has, since that time, this is going back about 10 years ago, it
Okay.
has really evolved. It's actually a core value of mine to live a creative type of lifestyle, which goes beyond just paint and glitter and glue.
Yeah.
But I turned out to be very surprised in the long run by what an important tool creativity was in my healing for a lot of reasons, community building being one, but also it really highlighted in a very concrete way early in my journey my negative self-talk
Mm.
and how captured I was by my inner critic. And
Yeah.
these things, but my perfectionism was a huge problem. So, continuing a creative process over the years literally helped me heal those kind of, I don't like to call them negative because they're a part of all of us, but they're
Yeah.
unhelpful for sure. So, those unhelpful patterns.
Yeah. Um, so have you always been creative and you just kind of like tapped back into it?
I was creative as a kid, but
Yeah.
I got the message or just knew, like so many people do, when I grew up, that like if I couldn't do it for a living, it was a waste of time.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And the other message many people get, which I've seen again and again in my kitchen when I have my community come over to do art and tears come, is that we have a lot of, many of us, most of us got negative messages about our creativity, meaning we
Mm.
weren't good at it as
Hmm.
kids.
Yeah.
And that really scarred us. And creativity is a core human trait. We all have creativity. Yes, of course. Some of us are better at it than
Yeah.
others
Yeah.
naturally, and that's like a whole other thing. But humans desire and need to be creative. So reclaiming that was also an act of sort of reclaiming part of my voice.
Hmm. So you mentioned, I can't remember the name of it now. The group that you do, the Tears and what is that called?
Group I do?
Where you get everyone together to do.
Well, it's just my in-person art community. We don't really have a
Yeah.
name. Like,
Oh, okay, okay. I thought it had a
yeah.
name for some reason. For some reason, I thought it had a name. Sorry.
I think it needs a name now. I think
Okay.
that's a message coming to me to give it a name
Yeah. So don't you guys get together pretty regularly and
every month. Yes,
Yeah.
every month. And I sometimes teach mixed media art journaling at the local adult ed. I've met a lot of the ladies in the community that way. And when the pandemic hit, I started teaching online. And so I was teaching women in other states and such. And
Hmm.
I don't do that as often now just because we don't need it and people are tired,
Yeah.
of being on Zoom and all
Yep.
that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's such a desire for so many people to have community,
Hmm.
and this is one way that really serviced me and my friends, because my friends are involved in the community too, to really have such a fun and helpful and good excuse to get together and play because it's
Yeah.
just fun too.
Yeah. Like a craft night.
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's awesome. That's cool. Well, I love that. I wish I had more. Well, you know what? I probably could make more time to be creative. I do. I used to do scrapbooking and stuff when I only had two kids. But then the more kids I had, the more it was like, oh, I'm running low on time and, priorities and all that. But it is so good. It's really therapeutic to like just put things on paper or, the journaling and you talk about journaling a lot too, and I know that that can be a creative outlet. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And the thing is, there's parts of us, depending upon if you have a frame of reference, like if you like, inner child work or
Hmm.
IFS or all these things, you don't have to look at it that way. But there really are parts of us that don't necessarily have words,
Hmm.
even as grown-ups. We have experiences that we've had, then we don't have all the words for it. So if we can just kind of get out of our own way and just play with images and play with other people's words, because there's lots of ways to do that in mixed media art journaling, we start making these pages and we're expressing things that we didn't necessarily even know
Yeah.
we wanted to express.
It just comes out.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Um, okay, well, let's talk about your book. So your book is called Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing, and it is out now, so people can get it anywhere, right? I saw it's on
Correct.
Amazon.
Yep. Anywhere books are sold.
Yeah, okay, cool. Um, so I would love for you to just kind of go back and share as much or as little as you want about where this book came from and how it's kind of helped in your healing.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So, back in 2012, my mother passed away very unexpectedly. She and my daughter were close. My daughter was 13 at the time. And a few weeks later, she woke up. My daughter woke up one morning and she wasn't very hungry. And then soon after that, she was barely eating anything at all. So that's
Mm,
the beginning of the story. Our lives up until that point had been quote unquote normal, whatever that
yeah,
means.
sure.
It was the summer before her eighth grade year. And, sports, drama, all the activities, everything was going great, school good, all the things. And then the unexpected death of my mother, which the longer and more often I talk about this and dive into this work, the more and more anecdotal information I see that a death precedes kind of the exact scenario that happened to us.
Mm,
So I hope that people who research these sorts of things are doing research about that and about how we can help our teens navigate mourning
yeah,
in a
it's
different
hard.
way. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's really hard. And I think it's something we don't talk about enough. But that was the book chronicles that time. I had no intention when we were going through this to write about it. I
Okay.
was journaling mostly to keep track of what we were experiencing
Yeah.
and my thoughts, feelings, and all that stuff. But as the years went by, I realized just how many families were going through similar situations to what we were.
Yeah.
And I felt so alone through the process. Like nobody could possibly understand my pain, my family's
Mm,
pain, my daughter's pain, all the things that we were going through, trying to get her help,
yeah.
bumping up against the system in ways that were both helpful and very much not helpful.
Hmm.
So, several years in, I thought, you know what? If I could write about our story in a way that would be helpful for other people experientially, like storytelling, not like a how-to, because there are
Sure.
no easy how-tos
Yeah.
for this. There
Yeah.
just aren't. And so I began working on it. And like I said, that was like 10 years ago.
Okay.
So it was quite a journey. And yes, the returning, what I didn't know as my daughter got sick and
Hmm.
as I started my own healing journey at that point, was that I was struggling with the effects of generational trauma myself. I had never
Yeah.
seen myself in trauma dialogue,
Mm.
but the coming back over and over and over again, writing some of the same scenes and changing how I was writing them and struggling to find the words and struggling with the process and all of that was actually part of my healing journey.
Mhm.
Rewiring perhaps my brain, or I don't exactly even know how to describe like the literal how of how it helped me heal. I just know 100% for sure that it did.
Yeah. Yeah. So I if your daughter is okay with it, can you tell us more about what was going on with her?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be sharing if I didn't have my
Yeah,
family's
I
permission.
assumed.
Sometimes, yeah, so, I feel like that should be a given, but I guess in
I
today's day and
know,
age, we
it's
can't,
not.
we can't,
No.
yeah, take anything for granted. So for sure, it's very vulnerable for myself, my husband, my daughter. So they've read it. I have their sign off. We're all
Mhm.
in our own ways passionate advocates for talking about mental health. We all have heads. We all have brains, we all have mental health, so we just need to make it a regular topic of conversation.
Yeah.
But yes, so it started with an eating disorder, and that was obvious very quickly. As I said, once you see your child hardly eating anything at all, and
Yeah.
then, even less than that, it's very terrifying. So our first trip, as is true for many people, was the pediatrician. And we did that a couple times before the pediatrician said she thought it was time for us to get some professional help.
Okay.
And we did. So every step of the way, we followed instructions. She was soon diagnosed with severe depression as well. So she was seeing an individual therapist two
Okay.
times a week and a nutritionist. And we did that for a couple of months, maybe 2 or 3 months, and she was still actually getting worse instead
Oh.
of getting better.
Mhm.
So that therapist recommended an eating disorder clinic near the house. So we
Okay.
started first with the PHP, which is the partial hospitalization where she would go every day after school. And she was also then starting to self-harm, which is very
Okay.
common.
Yeah.
And then that transitioned to IOP, which is intensive outpatient. So we had
Yeah.
to pull her out of school to go to treatment. It was a very lengthy journey,
Yeah.
which I chronicle every step and why we took it, again, in story form in the book, just so that people see their experience, I hope, mirrored, and what
Yeah.
we went through and they don't feel so alone. We kept doing what we felt like the system was telling us to do, taking the necessary steps. But what I had to learn the hard way was we don't actually have control over someone else, and we certainly don't have control
Yeah.
over someone else's illness.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, the story and our real life and the story
Mhm.
transitions when I realized that the only person's healing I can control is my own.
Mhm.
And that there were aspects to my relationship with my daughter and all my relationships that were unhealthy that I had inherited.
Mm.
So this is where kind of the generational
Mhm.
trauma comes in, and how we know that people who have mental health struggles do better when they have support. And my daughter had lots of support. We were very supportive and we were all on the same page. So what gets in the way then? If we
Yeah.
feel like we're on the same page about support, and at least in my story, that was unhealthy patterns in how I communicated
Sure.
and
Yeah.
my sort of codependency
Yeah.
and these things that I really had to kind of take my own goggles off and turn them around and look at myself
Yeah.
and say, there are parts of this that are not working. So how can I fix them?
Yeah.
And so, I intercut scenes from my childhood
Mm.
along the way to try to show how, those patterns that we
Yep.
learn, I mean, like from the minute we're conceived, that
Yep.
our parents learn, and that, most of this stuff comes from very far in the
Yeah.
past, how they get handed down and how they get repeated. Sometimes even when we know they happen energetically, they can still get repeated
Yeah.
if we're not doing the healing work and able to make more conscious choices.
Right. Gosh, that's so good. Well, and that's one of the things that I talk to all my clients about is like we have to be doing the work ourselves first. We can't And the piece where you said like we can't control what our kids do. We can't control their mental health. We can't control their healing journey, but we can control us. And so if we are doing all we can to be the healthiest for us, that's what we can control. Um, and that's so important. So you found that to be the most helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other, there are, of course, other things that parents have to do. So, yes, I mean, we have to facilitate the best treatment that we can,
Yeah.
find the most skilled therapists and treatment centers, which is harder than it sounds.
Yeah, it really
But
is.
it's very hard. And if anyone's going through that right now, I just want to say that I empathize with
Mhm.
that because, we were following instructions. We were going to places that were recommended to us by professionals and came up time and time again against, things that were not helpful and sometimes even harmful, but
Yeah.
that's like a whole other
Yeah,
conversation.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately, an important piece feels to say too that when we don't understand yet, because I think for many people it's a process like of learning and coming to this insight. When we don't understand yet, because we're terrified. We're
Yeah.
terrified that our children aren't eating. We're
Yeah.
terrified that they're having these symptoms. We're terrified that everybody's lives are never going to be the same again. We're
Yeah.
powerless. It's
It's
just a
scary.
really
Yeah.
scary and chaotic time. um, but again, like we can have an almost aggressive, combative relationship with the illness. And look, teens are hard enough.
Yeah,
Like,
I
right,
know.
like teens are
That's
already like,
reality.
wow, don't
Yeah.
talk to me that way. And that whole thing. But then when you throw illness into the mix,
Mhm.
what was true for us for quite a while, which I wish was not as long, and I hope maybe for somebody listening, it'll be a shorter duration for them than it was for us. But having an assertive, aggressive, like we want to get rid of this illness thing, and we knew rationally it was just going to take as long as it took. But when you're operating from that fear base and everyone's so afraid and everyone feels out of control and everyone feels powerless, it's just really a kind of a bad mix. But I wish we had been able to almost befriend the illness, because we really do talk about it as like a separate entity,
Mhm.
because the things that were happening were not my daughter speaking.
Yeah.
They were her illness speaking, or things, and behaviors that she was engaging in. And when there's that kind of combative relationship between, well, really anyone in the process, it's just so unhelpful,
Yeah.
because it's like every time we like she'd up the ante, so like so would we,
Mhm.
so then she would, so it, it just like escalated
Mhm.
instead of de-escalating.
Yeah.
And I feel like if we had been able, plus the system, if we had all been able to not just talk about, like, we all have to be more calm, but
Yeah.
to actually be
Actually.
able to embody that calmness,
Yeah.
which again, I was eventually able to do, but it took me a really long
Yeah.
time. I don't know. I can't say exactly how it would be different,
Mhm.
but I know it would have been a healthier environment for all of us to be in.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like we learn, right? And we can't go back and change it. And not that we want to say, well, I learned, so next time, because we don't want a next time. But it then allows you to be the voice to say, here's what I learned, so that you, everyone out there listening, doesn't have to make the same mistakes I made. So I think that it can be that advocate piece, which you are passionate about.
Absolutely, and or at least shorten the distance.
Hmm.
Like, if you hear some of these things, go, "Wait a minute, I wonder if that's me. I wonder if I do that." And, like,
Yeah.
I got into my own therapy almost immediately after my daughter was diagnosed because I knew I was gonna need the support. You
Good.
know, there's no reason why when life is going along, like, again, I say normal in quotes because what does that even mean? But like when, things are just going along, there's no reason why you might need to learn new skills. But when a loved one is diagnosed with a mental illness, things change.
Hmm.
And so I love this example I heard someone say that was like, if I was going to teach my child to speak Chinese, I'd have to learn how to speak Chinese first.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same situation. Like now that something has changed, like you need a new language, you need new dialogue, you need new way of coping, you need new mechanisms to try to bridge the divides rather than, make them further and further apart. So I knew that I was going to need help doing that. And, if someone's listening and going through this, if you're not already in your own therapy for yourself, if there's any way to facilitate it, I highly recommend it with someone who
Yeah.
specializes in the diagnoses that your loved one has.
Yeah. So you said that you got into your own therapy pretty quick, but do you remember that moment where you were like, okay, I need my own thing. I need help.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was almost instantaneous because I knew, and at the time, I never told people this because it just caused me more shame. Shame is such a big part of this.
Yeah.
I have a master's degree in counseling psychology that I already had. I'm not a therapist, but long before my daughter received her diagnosis, so I felt like I should have been able to see this coming. I should have
Hmm.
been able to prevent it. All the things, the mind F's that we do to
Yeah.
ourselves when things like this happen. But I knew immediately, like my own emotions were so volatile, and I didn't have experience shepherding anyone through something like this,
Yeah.
that I needed not only somebody who could help me with my daughter, but also with managing my own emotions, which it took me a very long time from that point to realize was part of my generational trauma. I
Hmm.
did not understand, or some people use the words emotionally immature parenting.
Yeah.
My parents were extremely emotionally immature, so I didn't get any of the type of validation or boundaries or all the things that we're supposed to get in childhood.
Hmm.
Well, I didn't know what they were, never even heard of a value or a boundary or whatever for years and years after my daughter's diagnosis. So I had to learn those things in my adult life for
Hmm.
myself before then I could learn how to healthily employ them with my daughter.
Hmm.
So it's all interconnected, but it's really important for me to say that those of us who had certain types of childhood, many of it, most of us don't learn
Yeah.
all of these skills. It's just not,
No. Yeah.
possible. Some people do, but when we're the adults of emotionally immature parenting, we don't have some of the skills that we need to effectively parent. So I had gotten into therapy the first time when my daughter was 6 months old, hoping to
Okay.
learn some of these skills because I didn't have a great relationship with my mother. I didn't really understand why. I didn't understand all the things that were going on. And that early therapy did help me a lot, but it still didn't elucidate all the things that were going on.
Yeah.
So this process has helped me have so much more compassion for my parents,
Hmm.
being able to see them not as mommy and daddy, but just as individual human beings who had full life experiences
Hmm.
before I was born, many traumas in both
Hmm.
of their lives. Then they came together and they had me, more traumas. I was supposed to have a baby sister who was stillborn.
Mm.
So
Wow.
when we can start to remove the judgment
Yeah.
and the blame and just look at the situation and go, okay, this had no choice but to have an impact on
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And we repeat some of those things because that's just how life works. So instead, again, of judgment and blame, how about I just kind of look at the facts and then take one step at a time and learn how to have a healthier dynamic within myself, because that
Hmm.
always comes first, healthier dynamic inside of us to then be able to have a healthier dynamic with the people we most love.
Yeah. That's good. Well, so what is your relationship like with your daughter now?
My favorite thing to talk about,
Yeah.
right above creativity.
Yeah.
She's doing great. She's 25 now, coming up on 26. She's living her best life.
Mm.
She's up north, about 6 hours away. I live in California, so she's up near
Okay.
San Francisco. She's living with her boyfriend, working, doing all the things. So it's not like perfect because
Yeah.
nothing
Nothing
is.
is.
But our relationship is so much stronger, so much more secure, so much better than I ever had the opportunity to
Mm,
have with my own mother.
yeah.
And this is why we do this work, because we want other people to be able to enjoy similar relationships, with the people they love.
Yeah.
And again, we can only control our part of that equation.
Yeah. That's cool that you guys are in a good place right now.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
that's not everyone's story. So
That's absolutely true. It doesn't
yeah.
work out this way for everybody, and there are different diagnoses that could have, caused things to go in different ways,
Yeah.
and so there is a certain amount of luck involved. But I don't wanna over highlight the luck just because we also
Yeah.
worked,
You
both of
did.
us, really, really hard, and our
Right.
whole family to get to where we are now.
Yeah. 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 Well, I think everyone needs to go get your book because it's very inspiring, and I
Thank
I
you.
just know that, um, you know, the people that listen to this podcast are parents and well, I guess not all of them are parents. There's caregivers. So whether it's foster parents, adoptive parents, grandparents, but they all have children in their lives and we understand trauma. Like this, what we talk about a lot here on the podcast is like we are all affected by trauma and it's hard to raise kids who um, have hard stuff. Like it just is that come from hard places that have lots of needs behind their behaviors. And so to have you share kind of how you guys handled your situation and how you've come out on the other side, maybe not out on the other side, how you've gone through the tunnel and how you have worked so hard to get to the light at the end of that tunnel. And you're still working towards that light. You're not fully there. We never are, right?
Exactly.
So I think everyone needs to go get your book and I will link where they can get it in the show notes. And so before we wrap it up though, I do have a couple questions to ask you that I ask all my guests. So the first one is, what do you wish more people thought of when it comes to trauma or generational trauma?
Absolutely. I think what I want to make clear about that for those of us who didn't see ourselves that way, I think most of us have a conception of what trauma is, and it's the adverse childhood
Yeah,
experiences. So it's sexual abuse,
yeah,
physical abuse, poverty, all these things. I didn't have any of those things.
yeah.
So I did not recognize myself in any of this dialogue until, I mean, literally very recently.
Hmm.
So I just appreciate and value the expansion of conversation around trauma because you do not have to have had any of those experiences
Nope.
to have a trauma in your history and unhealthy patterns and unhealthy ways of thinking about yourself and all these things. And that is definitely something I wish I knew a lot sooner and that I wish everyone knew more of was you don't have to tick those boxes
Yeah.
to have the effects of trauma going on in your life.
Yeah, it's bigger than just those 10 aces. I mean, those are a
Absolutely.
great starting point if you've never considered, your childhood experiences, and that's a great jumping off point, but it's way bigger than that. So yeah.
Absolutely. And the effects, what's blown my mind still, and I've been doing this for a long time, but it blows my mind literally like every part of my personality, the way I think about things. I just cannot overstate. It's like created my whole person.
Mhm.
And again, understanding that was a huge way for me to develop more compassion for myself.
Mhm.
Like once you realize, because before that you think you're just an a-hole or you're broken
Mhm.
or all those core messages like I'm just not enough, and
Mhm.
all that. That isn't our baggage. That comes from before and it
Mhm.
doesn't belong to us. And
Mhm.
so once you are able to start seeing these things and you start tasting and glimpsing kind of the freedom and liberation on the other side of being trapped by all of that the unhealthy thinking patterns and all of that unhealthy history, it's such a gift to ourselves and to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Okay, so what would be three resources you would recommend to, our listeners who are hearing this and saying, "Yeah, I need to do more work on myself." What would you say to them?
Well, I for sure okay, I'm holding 3 fingers so I don't forget.
Yeah.
So, I would for sure say therapy.
Yeah.
I can absolutely 100% not stress enough. I think every human being on the planet
Yeah.
can benefit from working with a good therapist.
Right?
So I mean, I hate, whatever. I'd like to take credit for a lot of stuff, but I have to truly say that probably every major insight I've had in my life was in a relationship with a talented therapist
Mhm.
who was able to call me on thoughts and all these
Mhm.
things. You just can't have that awakening without that help, I don't
Yeah.
think. And I mean, the suffering, is part of that. Like we're
Mhm.
suffering. And it wasn't until then my daughter was suffering too that I
Mhm.
realized I have to get a handle on this. So, for sure, not doing it alone.
Yeah.
Having a practice like a creativity
Mhm.
or journal writing or something, I think self care is one of the most misunderstood necessities of
Oh,
our
yeah.
like ever.
Yep.
And I
And I
love a
think
good,
moms are the worst at it.
I
Would you
completely
agree?
agree.
Okay.
Completely agree. I mean,
I don't
nobody
know
was
why
telling
that
us
is. I know.
that, to prioritize ourselves.
I
Like, whoever
know.
said that?
Yeah.
I mean,
We're
and
saying it
there's
now.
yeah, 100%. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this too. Like all these
Mhm.
words, I think healing, self-care, compassion, these are all really big words that I think mean different things to different people. But what I'm learning, just to the short version of it, is they're each their own like little onion. I
Yeah.
mean, to
Peeling away.
peel back the
Mhm.
understanding of these things and not take for granted that what we know is all there is to know about these things.
Yeah.
So, I love a good mani-pedi, all of that stuff, but I'm also talking about this kind of self-care, like
Yeah.
healing and doing our own internal work, finding our own identity, healing those past patterns that no longer serve. That I also view as self-care.
Mhm.
So, if you're in the throes of chaos, maybe you aren't able to get to that point yet because that too takes time and
Yeah.
it takes work and all the things.
Energy.
Energy,
Yeah.
yeah, all of that. So how do you get the energy? Well, you start small
Yeah.
by taking care of yourself. And if you have a child who's struggling with a diagnosis of some kind, this can last, we're talking about years,
Yeah.
years and years. So how are you going to have the wherewithal to be the healthiest version of yourself if you're not willing to give to your own self
Yeah.
first?
Yeah.
And I know we all get that selfish message coming up. And there's lots of ways to talk about self-care other than all the external stuff. But I was recently heard somebody say it like imagine it's self-care in service to others.
Mm,
So,
mhm.
like, the very act of taking care of ourselves is a service to
Mhm.
others because we're gonna be able to be available for them in the ways that they need us. And I
Absolutely.
think that's just another great way of saying, because different things resonate with people differently.
Yeah.
Um, and I think third would really be community.
Okay.
I can't stress mental illness, other diagnoses. It can be so isolating.
Yeah.
And if you're someone like me who was riddled for a long time with shame and inadequacy, struggling with perfectionism, coming to grips with the fact that I'm not a perfect person. Oh my
Mhm.
God. It can be cause you even more to pull away.
Yeah.
And we don't heal in isolation. We heal in relationship.
Yeah.
And so again, this can be something that, is a progression,
Mhm.
but start small. And I did, if you've extracted yourself out of your life, removed yourself away from all of your friends, all of your activities, all of the things that used to give you pleasure, take one step back towards relationship because it truly is where we thrive.
Yeah.
And find somebody who you feel is safe for you. If you feel unsafe in a lot of relationships, maybe you need to think outside the box on that.
Yeah.
But really coming back out of isolation is a powerful tool in and of itself.
Mhm. Yeah. Karen Purvis. Do you know Dr. Karen Purvis?
No, I don't.
She founded TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Interventions, and she's passed, so she's no longer with us. But she's was so smart and so amazing, and she always would say that any hurts that happen in relationship can only be healed in relationship, and that's so true. So I think that's encompasses what you're saying, and yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
have to again, I mean, as frustrating as this is, because I really got angry hearing this for like a year and 2/3 or more from my therapist. As frustrating as this reality is, everything we want for anyone else starts with ourselves.
yeah,
There
it's
are
true.
no easy answers, and we will never, we rationally know we can't control other people, but in the trouble, in the
Yeah,
strife, in the suffering, in the conflict, we forget about
yeah,
like almost everything we ever knew. So really learning to trust ourselves. What does that even mean? What does it look like? We start there, and then yes, then we branch out and we make these things reality by doing it, with other
yep,
people.
yeah, yeah. So good, so good. Well, I appreciate you being on today and sharing your a little glimpse of your story. Everyone needs to get your book so they can read all about it and be inspired by you. So thank you so much for being open. Tell your daughter thank you for allowing you to share her story as well, because that can help um, others find their own healing, and maybe even other teenagers hear her story and be inspired. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's been
Yeah.
such a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, my friend. Well, you have a great day.
You too.
Okay. Bye.